Liz Truss isn't someone who wants to go along with the pack. She doesn't want to be part of her. She wants to break out. This is all of her rhetoric, and her style is a confrontational style.
Welcome back to Breakout with Breaking Views. I'm Peter Fallason, the global editor, coming to you today from northwest London. And I'm joined by Hugo Dixon, the commentator at large at Reuters. Welcome, Hugo.
Hello, Peter.
So we have, Britain has a new Prime Minister again. She is Liz Truss, the former Foreign Secretary. Just a few hours ago was elected, or the results of the election were announced, and she won the party leadership, and therefore we assume, barring any major constitutional upsets, she will be the next Prime Minister of Britain. So Hugo, you've been looking at the question of what Liz Truss means for the economy and for financial markets. So what can we expect from Trussonomics?
Well, we can expect, I think, quite a populist approach. She talks about supply-side economics, meaning that she wants to get the economy working more efficiently and getting onto a long-term growth trajectory that's higher than we've seen in recent decade or so. But I think in reality, what we're going to see is quite a populist approach. So we're going to see not only an extremely expensive support package for consumers and businesses to get them through the energy crisis, which of course is happening everywhere, but we're also going to see tax cuts. So it's the combination of those two things which means that we're going to have quite a lot of fiscal laxity. That's a sort of one aspect of things. There will also be, I think, quite a lot of tension between her and the Bank of England. After all, Britain has got higher inflation than the other G7 countries. We're already over 10% and perhaps heading to, the mid-teens and conceivably up to nearly 20%. And so the Bank of England is going to need to put on the brakes, but Liz Truss has already been saying they didn't do enough in the past, and they've made errors, and there's questioning whether the mandate should be changed. And so that's another thing, that the whole interaction between the government and monetary policy, which of course at last, since Lehman Brothers, it's been virtually zero interest rates. This is a completely different change happening everywhere, but more so in Britain, because we've got that higher inflation rate, which is perhaps going to last longer. And third, which is the real wild card, is what she does on Brexit, because we may be 6 years from the after the referendum, but the thing still hasn't settled down because of the issue with Northern Ireland, and that could trigger a trade war with the EU. And so that would be a really wild thing. And then there's questions, what does that mean for the markets?
Yeah, because I guess you were talking about some of the challenges she's facing are the same as other countries are facing. Other countries are dealing with, in Europe, are dealing with energy prices and subsidizing customers and rising debt and inflation and higher interest rates to a certain extent. Maybe not so much. Interest rates are still lower in the EU than they are in the UK, but they're rising. So there is that sense, a little bit of sort of, to what extent is Britain in the pack with the rest of the West? And to what extent is Truss going to go in her own direction? And does that make it Britain a bit more vulnerable?
Well, first of all, I think the West is, and you have to divide the West between America and Europe, because actually America is going to get out of this crisis much sooner. And because it's a net energy exporter, in some ways it benefits from this crisis. So the question is, are we part of the European pack? Well, so far, the pound and euro pretty much the same against the dollar this year. But in the last 10 days, you've started to see what could be the first sign of divergence between the pound and the euro, about 2% weakening versus the euro, on top of the fall that we've seen versus the dollar. The second thing is that you've seen, obviously everywhere, bond yields are going up. They've been going up because of inflation, et cetera, even before the Ukraine war, but obviously that's added an extra fillip to it. But then again, what you've seen in the last 10 days, or last month actually, is you've seen a widening of the spread between UK government bonds and German government bonds. Not a huge amount, about 30 basis points, but interestingly, that's about the same as we've seen with Italian government bonds versus bunds. And Italy is about to have a fascist government, probably. So it's in a sense where we're that's where the markets are sort of placing the UK at the moment. My own concern is that because of our higher inflation, because it's not just about policies. I mean, first of all, we are in a slightly weaker structural position than other countries because of our higher inflation, which is partly caused by Brexit, and because we've had this chronic current account deficit. So we do rely on foreigners to support our spending. But on top of that, it's a question of style. Liz Truss isn't someone who wants to go along with the pack. She doesn't want to be part of the herd. She wants to break out. This is all of her rhetoric, and her style is a confrontational style. And we've seen that a bit with the Bank of England. We may see that big time with Europe. We have certainly seen a bit of that with Europe. We've also seen it, interesting enough, with America, where she says doesn't believe in the special relationship, and reports that she's going to have a sort of brand China a threat. So you could find that we've actually hardly a diplomatic approach with any of our three big trading partners, of which Europe is obviously the most important: Europe, America, and China. So I think that at this moment there is a big risk of us being treated as an outlier.
Yeah, and so
rogue outlier.
Right, and so maybe there's a little hint of that sort of creeping into some of the financial markets. But I guess with respect to the EU, can she really afford to pick a fight with the EU, given everything else that's going on? She wants to do tax cuts, inflation's very high, interest rates are already going up a lot. Surely trying to sort of, doing something that then potentially leads to even more trade tension with the EU, doesn't that make all those things worse?
Well, it does. But I mean, with the whole Brexit saga, which has been going on, for over 6 years, it's not always that the rational solution has prevailed. There's a lot of emotion about this, and not just emotion. There's also a lot of narrow political calculation, which is not necessarily what is good for the country, for Britain. It's a question of what is good for the Conservative Party. It's not even necessarily what is good for the Conservative Party. It's what is good for particular people who are in control of the Conservative Party. And there's a particular faction that dominates it. And Liz Truss, who we have to remember, was actually in favor of Britain staying in the EU in that referendum in 2016, she now has the enthusiasm of a convert. Whether that's genuine or not, who knows? But she has sold her soul to the hardline Brexiters in her party. And she may find that even if it is very bad for the economy, this is the only thing that makes sense for her in her narrow political calculation.
Right. So, well, Hugo, thank you very much. I think the summary is we need to buckle up and get ready for a possibly a wild ride. We'll be watching this with interest, and I'm sure it's a subject we'll return to. Hugo, thanks very much.
Thank you, Peter.